Hello everyone, and welcome to the interviews I have with my own self in my own mind podcast. I'm Tiara Ariel, an HSP and truth seeker trying to understand herself, her life, and the world. Today we are joined by Tiara Ariel, an HSP, certified wellness coach, and content creator that has designed and built a 106 plus module online program for HSPs that includes over 24 hours of video content on improving your health, relationships, and career, with accompanying exercises and guidance to be able to actually implement these ideas and make actual progress in your life. You also have an art degree and studied theatrical set design and photography, did a year-long entrepreneurship training, have lived in 2 countries and 6 US states, and for the past 15 plus years, you've been educating yourself on topics such as the HSP trait, holistic wellness, mindset psychology, healthy relationship dynamics, emotional intelligence, trauma, the nervous system, chronic stress, manifestation, intuition. Holy crap, how is this the first time you've been publicly interviewed? Hey Tiara, thanks for having me and for the praise. I think it's just that growing organically online these days can be very challenging and take a decent amount of time. But I know that what I have to share with HSPs is imperative and very valuable, so I'm just gonna keep persevering. My goal is to get my content and my work out to as many HSPs as possible, so I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to interview with you and share some of these mind-blowing insights that have changed my life, as well as the HSPs in my inner circle and a lot of the HSP clients that I've worked with. You're so welcome. We're so excited to have you here. Plus, this is also kind of better for me because I tend to get really nervous in interviews because I'm so stressed that if I misspeak, I'm gonna piss off a bunch of people. So this way I can at least just delete something and replace it if I screw up. There you go. And actually, if you're the host, that must mean that this interview is taking place in your mind. Are we actually in your mind right now? Yeah. Huh. It's interesting. What? Well, it's just kind of surprising because it looks very clean and organized and sparse in here. Oh yes, of course. That's because all of my mind clutter and all of my mental chaos is tucked behind the curtain over here. Okay, that actually makes a lot more sense. Oh gosh, please don't. You can actually declutter your mind and get a lot more of your mental energy back if you want some recommendations. Yes, please. So I would recommend that you do something that allows you to tangibly discharge your thoughts. So that could be writing out all your thoughts and doing a brain dump. That could be using the Notes app on your phone to kind of get your thoughts out during the day, or making a practice of journaling before bed to kind of process your day before you go to sleep. As well as getting out of your head and into your body more. So practicing being in the present moment, tuning into your senses, noting things around you that you enjoy and are grateful for. What else? You could also affirm to yourself that it's safe to just be, that you don't have to be always solving problems or accomplishing things or trying to make sense of everything in your mind all the time. And of course, having compassion for yourself and not shaming yourself when you do slip into overthinking. All of these things can really help with all of that back there. These can all help your mind relax so you don't feel like you're constantly processing things, so that your mind doesn't look like an intergalactic pinball machine. Wow. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Sure, of course. So why don't we start with the definition of the highly sensitive trait, just for anyone who's watching who might be fairly new to the topic. Okay, yeah, sure. So high sensitivity, or scientifically referred to as sensory processing sensitivity, is a genetic and therefore innate trait that makes a person's nervous system more sensitive, hence the name highly sensitive person. What this essentially means is that for HSPs, all sensory experiences are dialed up. So if you were to imagine dialing up a microphone or a guitar amp, the guitar sounds would not only sound louder, but all of those little noises of the person touching and sliding their fingers across the strings would be more noticeable too. Ooh, I like that analogy. Yeah. Yeah, so that's kind of how our nervous system works. We pick up on all kinds of information to a greater depth and detail, which can make it almost feel like it's higher in volume. As in, it feels like it's more in our face, harder to ignore, more noticeable, and potentially more overwhelming. Ah, that makes so much sense. And that's just our nervous systems. Our brains, as highly sensitive people, also make it so that this incoming information and our experiences and our thoughts are processed in greater depth than the average person, which can mean we can end up being lost in thought very often, and that we might need extra time to process our experiences while we sort through ideas, make connections, and process all of these thoughts in our minds. So think detail and depth. Yes, I can definitely relate to that. Taking in so much information and thinking about it so deeply can sometimes get really exhausting. And actually, that's something that I wanted to get your opinion on, because I know there are many HSPs out there that tend to feel like their HSP trait is a burden and kind of feel like it's frustrating or just like a nuisance. But I know that in pieces of content of yours, you've said that the HSP trait is something that you think is actually an asset. Yeah, I do. And that you even go as far as having pride in your trait now, is that right? Absolutely. I didn't always feel that way, but I certainly do now after learning more about the trait and thinking about how useful and purposeful it is. Yeah, can you elaborate on that? I would love to know what you mean. How is the highly sensitive trait useful? Sure. So the highly sensitive trait exists in roughly 1/5 of the population, and that goes across races, genders, origins, doesn't make a difference. And also it exists in over 100 different species. And get this, in the same percentage of the population across all of those species. And it has remained in that significant level of the population generation after generation. Wait a second, really? That's weird, right? You're catching on here. It does seem a little odd and non-coincidental, doesn't it? Yeah, wow, it almost feels like it was planned to be that way. Which, if you ask me, is extremely interesting. I'm not sure that you can see these types of patterns among many genetic traits, although to be honest, I don't really know for sure. But if the HSP trait is consistently in a large minority group of the population among all of these different species, and that has not changed over time, this just gives me such an overwhelming impression that this trait has a clear purpose and is universally beneficial in all of the species that it's found in. But if there is such a distinct pattern, and it does seem planned, how could that be? Well, I think that there are multiple angles you could look at this. I think that you could look at this through a spiritual lens and say that this trait must have a broader purpose and that God intended to create highly sensitive people, and that it was purposeful that there was supposed to be a subset of the population that was going to be more sensitive and that they would have unique gifts to offer the world. Yeah, I could see how that idea could resonate with and comfort people. Or if you want to look at this strictly through a scientific evolutionary standpoint, thinking about how humans have evolved over time, it could have been that there were groups of people that existed that had a handful of people in their population that were more sensitive to their surroundings, and that those communities thrived, and the communities that didn't have this variation of sensitivity in their population didn't survive as well. Yeah, interesting theory, like survival of the fittest. Yes, exactly. And remember that the HSP trait is a genetic trait. So if it had no greater purpose for our survival of our or any other species, it would get phased out over time, would it not? Interesting. If the highly sensitive trait truly posed no benefit to the survival of the population, then those groups without any presence of high sensitivity would have been the ones that fended better, virtually making the HSP trait become extinct, which is not what happened. The HSP trait has hung around in 15 to 20, up to 30% of the population. And while yes, that is a minority, it's still a very significant portion of the population. This is not some rare genetic hiccup that only occurs very randomly. This is a very prevalent trait that, from this perspective, is clearly significant and must be for a reason. Wow. Yeah. So it is my theory, based on what we know so far about the highly sensitive trait, that it is incredibly purposeful and beneficial to our survival as an entire population. You know, that is so interesting because there are so many HSPs out there that feel like their HSP trait is just a burden, has no purpose, and is just wrecking their lives. Yes, which is really sad, and is a big part of what I'm trying to help change in the minds of many highly sensitive people, because clearly this trait isn't going anywhere, and because of its continued presence in our population over time, it feels like there's a reason that HSPs exist, and in the percentage that they do. So I'll share even more about my theory, because I think ultimately it'll help a lot of HSPs start to view their trait in a more positive light. Please do. I have found this absolutely fascinating so far. Great. So if you play along with this idea that the highly sensitive trait has been beneficial enough for the process of evolution to continue to favor it being in the population, then we can agree that the highly sensitive trait is useful, and then we can begin to imagine why this might be the case. We can conceptualize how it has been useful. So if we think back to a time when we were all hunters and gatherers, aiming to build and maintain a village at the dawn of civilization. Okay. Any ideas as to how heightened sensitivity being prevalent in some of the people may have been helpful to the entire village? Well, I know in my own life, sometimes I've been able to hear sounds that other people haven't been able to hear. Or I've seemingly been able to foresee someone's emotional outburst. Or have sometimes come up with creative solutions to ideas that other people might not have thought of yet. So in hunter-gatherer times, that could probably translate to being able to hear a predator in the bushes and then being able to warn the others. Or coming up with an idea for a new tool or something. Yes, potentially even being skilled at tracking weather patterns and being able to predict when a storm is coming, or being an advisor during negotiations with other tribes. Oh yes, good ones. And perhaps also the higher degree of empathy in an HSP would be really good when you're living in close-knit communities where the old and the young are living together and they're having to depend on one another. Yes, also very plausible ideas, and I'm sure we could continue to come up with more. High sensitivity as a trait poses many benefits to HSPs and others around them. Think about it. Keen awareness of subtleties in our environments and the ability to make connections between things and process information to a great depth are all incredible skills to lend to a community. Okay, so follow-up question then. If all of these skills are so valuable, why is it then in this theory that not everyone in the group is highly sensitive? I'm glad you brought that up because here comes the next part of my theory. Okay, I'm listening. If HSPs did take up more of the population, they would actually become less useful. And same goes for non-HSPs too. The ratio of HSPs to non-HSPs in my mind makes perfect sense for what a society needs as a whole to be safe and productive and what each group is typically skilled at. And if that ratio was much different, the balance of how the society works in harmony as a whole would be thrown off. So for example, we talked about some strengths of HSPs. Now, what are some strengths of non-HSPs that you could speculate? Well, I'd venture to say that non-HSPs overall have more energy than HSPs who seem to drain more easily, and that maybe they'd be less distracted easily by their surroundings because they're not as affected by what's going on around them as compared to someone who is by definition more sensitive to their environment. Yes, exactly. So in theory, non-HSPs might be very well suited for tasks that require more stamina or the ability to tune out more distractions, to just put on blinders, so to speak, and get the job done. Whereas an HSP would likely be more well suited for tasks that allow them to lean into their skill of being more keenly aware of their surroundings or being more introspective and contemplative. So maybe the HSPs would be the ones deciphering whether or not the crops were ripe enough to take to the marketplace and harvesting them. And the non-HSPs would be the ones taking the crops to the busier marketplace to sell and trade them. That's a great example. Or another example would be that maybe the non-HSPs are in the village building the structures and homes and not having to worry about any outside threats because the HSPs are the ones on the outskirts of the village serving as scouts to warn and protect the villagers. Ah, interesting. So now that you've got that scene set in your mind, now imagine if the HSPs and the non-HSPs were to switch places, okay? So the non-HSPs were the ones out scouting, and the HSPs were the ones in charge of doing the tasks in the central, busier part of the village. The HSPs would likely drain much faster, not having as easy of a time being able to tune out noises and distractions, and the non-HSPs would be more likely to miss a detail and not notice that maybe a thief just snuck into the village. In this scenario, the whole community is dysfunctional. Yeah. Think about our guitar amp or microphone analogy from earlier. Where would you want to place an amp dialed all the way up? In the middle of the busy town square or outside in the forest where the sounds are extremely subtle and nuanced? Where would you want to place an amp that's dialed all the way down? That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so now also imagine a hypothetical village where just the percentages of these groups were flipped, okay? So the non-HSPs were the minority and the HSPs were the overwhelming majority. If 80% of the population were the HSPs out scouting and 20% were the non-HSPs building, not very much would be getting done in the thick of the town square and there'd be way too many people out looking for threats. It just wouldn't be as efficient, would it? Wow, okay, so you're saying in theory that the HSP trait is highly beneficial and useful to not only ourselves, but to society as a whole, and therefore the same thing can also be said of non-HSPs as well. Yes, precisely. And if all of this is in fact true, that would mean that our innate and exact level of sensitivity, whether we're an HSP or not, is entirely purposeful. that all of us have unique skills and talents that we bring to the table, and that we're all better off because we differ, and that we can have a more well-rounded society because we can lend our strengths to each other. Wow, what a great way to look at it. So if you're an HSP out there, the takeaway here is to see your sensitivity as something that can really help you, not only to survive, but to thrive as well. Okay, cool. Yeah, so let's talk about what that actually looks like. What does it look like to be utilizing our skill sets as sensitive people in today's modern world, where let's say we're not necessarily needing to warn the villagers about a tiger or predict a storm? Yep, so even though our environments and routines may look a lot different today than they did back then, the way that we interact with the world is still the same. So we still have the goal to achieve things and be productive. We're still on the lookout for useful information, and we still have the desire to connect and build healthy, meaningful relationships. So we can utilize our information gathering skills and our contemplative nature to come up with ideas and solutions at work or in our relationships. And our higher degree of empathy can help us want to develop our communication skills and deepen our relationships. Our deep connection with our environment can help us be more in touch with life and find joy in the little things, and can also help us decipher which environments and relationships are good for us based on how we feel in them. Can you think of ways that your highly sensitive trait has benefited you in your current life? Sure. I mean, even down to the most minute things, like being able to spot typos faster or maybe more thoroughly than some of my colleagues, or being able to come up with ideas that maybe other people haven't thought of yet. And even some bigger things like noticing that my pet was sick and being able to bring them to the vet and catch issues before they got worse. And I also feel like I found profound joys in little things in life, like the colors of a sunset, or the sound of beautiful music, or the taste of really good food, or the texture of a really soft blanket. Really, I think being highly sensitive adds to everything that I do and aids me in achieving all of my different goals in life. I think that it helps me do better work and be more attentive in my relationships. Like in this scenario, for example, I think that being wired to focus on social emotional cues helps me connect better with my guest. Which also brings me to another good takeaway. I would encourage you to take this idea that your highly sensitive trait is beneficial and purposeful even one step further, to entertaining the idea that you are exactly the right amount of sensitive that you were designed to be for the role that you are meant to fill. Which you could then take even one step further to speculate that even your weaknesses and your perceived shortcomings, or the things that you don't enjoy doing at all, are also purposeful too, that are trying to lead and direct you to the best and most optimal environments and roles for you to contribute to this world in the most sustainable and enjoyable way. Wow. Yeah, definitely. That makes sense. Like, for example, someone who's meant to be a talk show host is going to have certain interests and skill sets and weaknesses in areas that they truly have no desire to develop a skill in, that all play a part in their success in that role. That will look very different than the sets of traits in the professional athlete or a musician, for example. And your level of sensitivity as a person is one of those traits, just like all the other traits that you have that come together to form a unique combination that makes you well suited for specific roles and specific relationships too. Essentially, we're talking about compatibility. One trait in one role or relationship will be highly valued, whereas in another role or relationship, it may not be. And there's nothing really personal about that. Truly, it's just the matchmaking of life. Very, very true. So if you're feeling like you are too sensitive, you're likely in the wrong roles, the wrong relationships, the wrong environments, if you don't feel like your sensitivity is an asset to you and those around you. You should feel like your skills and talents are needed and appreciated, and that you and the people around you can work in harmony, expertly utilizing and leaning on each other's skill sets for the betterment of everyone involved. That is how society is supposed to work, embracing differences and placing everyone where they are most likely to be useful and most likely to thrive, to strengthen and advance the entire population as a result. To find the places, relationships, and roles that offer you the highest compatibility, harmony, and alignment with who you are. So I would encourage you to entertain the idea that you are the exact right amount of sensitive for whatever it is you came here to do and whoever it is you came here to do that with. This can help you have a much more neutral and even loving perspective on being highly sensitive. It helps you stop focusing your energy on disowning this part of you and finding ways instead to integrate it into your life for the betterment of your own well-being and to help aid you in whatever ways you hope to contribute to the world. That's such a good perspective shift. There are so many HSPs out there that have really big dreams that might think that their sensitivity is getting in the way of. But actually, if they can see their highly sensitive trait as something that's entirely purposeful to who they are and what they came here to do, that suddenly flips the script. and can give them an edge and more confidence and momentum to go towards their dreams. Yes, entirely. And this is part of why I'm so passionate about helping HSPs flip the script of their view of their own sensitivity so that they can feel empowered and encouraged to pursue the things that really matter to them and start seeing how their sensitivity can actually help them achieve their goals rather than hinder them. Right. HSPs deserve to feel like who they are is valuable and needed and feel successful and appreciated. Absolutely. I also think that HSPs are needed now more than ever to wake up to their power and share their gifts in a world that could use a lot more empathy and compassion and clever ideas and out-of-the-box thinking. That's so true. We have plenty of issues that need to be solved in the world right now around big topics like the health of the planet and the people and animals and plants living here, which happen to be topics that many HSPs do care about. So let's get these people encouraged and empowered to embrace their trait and embrace their gifts and go after and pursue the things that really matter to them, that they have great ideas and solutions for. I full-heartedly agree. What incredible information and insights. I feel like a lot more HSPs would really benefit from seeing this. Absolutely. I think so. I mean, this way of viewing the trait has really helped me. So if it helps you, take what resonates and leave the rest. But this mentality has really helped me accept and embrace my trait and start to see its purpose and its benefit to me and feel gratitude for it and begin to shift my focus to finding ways that this trait can actually be useful and beneficial for me and help me in my success in every area of life. I now have more energy to focus on moving forward and utilizing this toolkit instead of being frustrated that I'm having to carry it around or trying to get rid of it, which is truly just a waste of energy. I can now move beyond trying to wrestle with this thing and move on to progressing in life and achieving goals, which is what we're supposed to be doing anyway. Incredible. If you thought this video was super valuable, please share it and get it in front of more highly sensitive people who would benefit from seeing this, whose life might actually change for the better as a result of seeing this video. And if you want to learn more about Tiara's online program for HSPs, her YouTube channel, her card deck, or just to learn more about her in general, all the links are in the description. Thanks so much for being here, Tiara, and sharing all of your insights with us. Thanks for having me. Of course, you were a fantastic guest and we'll have to have you back on. And you did great, by the way. You didn't screw up at all. True. Or did I, and I just deleted it and replaced it in both of our minds? Huh. I guess we'll never know. Tune in next time for more discussions on the HSP traits. This girl knows what she's talking about, right? Don't you? Don't you?